Did the Badgers land their next great preferred walk-on for the football team? We're going to talk about that and more on today's Locked On Badgers with John Garcia.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm your host of Locked On Badgers, Ryan Herrings. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, listen to your show every day. I also want to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to first and faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. Also, today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And we're going to bring John Garcia into the show, and we're going to talk some recruiting. And John, I think the first episode we did together last year, I believe we talked about walk-on program. We talked about Luna Larson, Cam Fain, right? And we were hashing up a little bit. The Badgers landed another preferred walk-on, Will McDonald, older brothers on the team, 6'4", 230-pounder out of Hudson, Wisconsin. You get a chance to look at his film. What do you think of his game? Is this another steal as a walk-on potentially?
You talking football or lacrosse here, Ryan? Because I haven't watched a lot of lacrosse this year, but man, everybody who scouts that sport says this is one of the best players, not only in the state of Wisconsin, but elsewhere. And I think that is so intriguing when you talk about a potential pass rusher, right? Because what do you need? Balance, hand-eye coordination. You need to be anticipatory. All the things that I have a degree from Syracuse. I know about a little bit of lacrosse. You have to have some of those same things in lacrosse and as a true pass rusher. And I think that is so intriguing, a standalone on his game. But I think on his football tape, what maybe lacrosse doesn't always get to show, because you got to carry the stick, is the speed. I really like the way this kid runs. The motor here is really strong. You already mentioned the size as well. So yeah, this is a steal. How could it not be? We've talked about Wisconsin's ability to recruit PWOs as if they were scholarship guys. And there always has to be a bit of a unique situation in my mind to do it, whether it's so much prowess at the position. This is your dream school, or, hey, big bro's already on the team, so let's jump in. So I think there's certainly some advantageous elements that Wisconsin was able to capitalize on in this regard. But just in the player with McDonald's game, he is an intriguing pass rusher who you could see staying trim. I don't know if he's going to play lacrosse up there as well, or you could see him adding some weight and becoming a little bit more of a strong side, filled out type of defensive end. But either way, this kid is a high motor, bendy, anticipatory pass rusher. And look, you just can't have too many of those on any roster.
Sure, and especially, we're talking about a player Iowa State offer, Kansas offer, and it's not blue chip stuff, but like those are legit Power 5 D1 offers. To bring a player in, I wanted to ask you this too. To bring a player in as a preferred walk-on, you mentioned there has to be some type of usually advantageous thing, but this is something the Badgers find that advantageous thing 2 or 3 times every cycle. Is there any other program, because we're pretty hyper-focused here on Wisconsin, is there any other program nationally that attacks preferred walk-on recruiting like in a way like Wisconsin does?
Not in the same way, Ryan. I think other programs bring in great PWOs just because usually it's because they're great programs, right? I mean, does Georgia get great PWOs locally because they're close to Atlanta and they're at the top right now? Of course, but we don't typically see it against other Power 5 schools. I think that's where the Wisconsin angle feels a little bit different. Usually it's, do I go Ivy League, or do I go Group of 5, or take a walk-on at Alabama, right? I mean, that's a legitimate conversation to have with your family and the people who are helping you make this critical decision. But it's not so much, do I walk on at Wisconsin or go play on scholarship at Kansas State, which, for his position, I mean, they've had some prowess at that spot too. You would not, blink twice at that if he were to make that decision on the other end. So I think that is where it really just kind of looks great optically. I think it shows stability. It shows the culture of Wisconsin is something that is collectively bought into with in-staters in particular. And that's something that's really hard to duplicate, even when you talk about the schools that have the rings, Bama, Georgia, Clemson, Ohio State. It's hard to sell that type of continuity at those programs because it really doesn't exist. There's too much turnover. Even from a player perspective, there's too much turnover to really dig into those kind of deals. Legacy status doesn't matter as much as some of these programs. It's really more about the bottom line. Can you help us or can you not? I don't care who your big brother is. Wisconsin does care who this kid's big brother is. And not to say that they're sacrificing talent to make a good story, but obviously if they're able to check both boxes, they're going to move forward with those type of situations. So I do think it's something that is uniquely Wisconsin and something that, you put me on to. I didn't realize the frequency of, contending for FBS and Power 5 prospects as walk-ons, but here we are, and now I'm kind of expecting it for Wisconsin. So when you sent me the show notes on Will McDonald, I'm like, okay, cool. They got another one. It's kind of expected at this point.
And talk to me about this. Recruiting at some level is a numbers game, right? I mean, everyone that if you get a couple 5 stars, it's great. But at some level, it's just stacking as many bodies as you can, seeing what sticks, because this is another aspect where the Badgers have found a way to just add more bodies, more lottery tickets, more scratch offs, right? I mean, that's really kind of the end answer here.
And it's more important than it's ever been, Ryan, right? I mean, this is a nightmare era for roster management, whether it's Saban or whether it's, the newest coach at Kansas. It is a roster management nightmare because of the portal, extra eligibility, all the stuff that we've talked about. It's really hard to get to 85. And at some point, a lot of these schools are having to say, hey, if you are not here on the depth chart or whatever it is, you should probably look around, and that's not something that any school wants to do. But if you can play the gray area with a walk-on, it really does allow you to take advantage of those opportunities. So when the attrition does happen and 2 years from now, Will McDonald has, made a splash in the spring game or whatever it is, and he earns a step up, now you can just hand it to him because it's almost waiting in the wings on your own roster. And there's just not a lot of programs that have that. We don't. Have you noticed, on social media and stuff, we unfortunately have to live on social as recruiting experts. Not a whole lot of camp stories this fall in college football with the great walk-on video. Those
are great moments,
right? Hey,
those
you're
are
on
just
scholarship
awesome.
Now, I haven't seen many this fall, right? I mean, that's something that is a tradition, and it'll come. But it seems like that rate is starting to trickle down just a little bit because, again, roster management is at the brim. All these player empowerment and movement and fluid movements have happened at the top of college football, but the scholarship limit hasn't changed. So until there's some movement there, it's going to be touch and go with some of these programs, and it's going to be a little bit more professional in style where you got to cut some kids at some point. But if you can get them to gray shirt, which is a delayed enrollment,
sure,
or walk on, now all of a sudden you can play the margins a little bit, and they can count at the next class or the class before, depending on their graduation. You can start to manipulate that to a degree, just like we see in the professional ranks with, this is a restricted free agent. We can wait till this deadline, pay them less money. It's just a different level of roster management that none of these coaches wanted, but it's the circumstances that they're all dealing with right now. So this is a huge, huge advantage for Wisconsin to already have sort of this built-in culture of, we get walk-ons and they play and they play, that they're not bodies for practice. So I think that's something that is so valuable for both ends of this thing, for Wisconsin and roster management, and for these players that, maybe thought, hey, I don't have a chance to go here, but now maybe I do. And if I stay the course, I can actually see the field. It's not just a practice dummy type of situation as the walk-on connotation still kind of lives with it.
And I think that's really the key here is Wisconsin can now show people, like, if you stick it through, right, these are the players in the NFL that were here as walk-ons. I think that's the stumbling block other programs are going to run into is they can't really show that proof of concept. I want to go back to Will really quick and finish up on this. When I watch him, you mentioned, does he get a little bigger? Does he stay lean? I thought when I first turned on the film and I saw the size 6'4", 230, I thought he'd be a little stockier. He's got long arms. He's lanky. So he really could stay a little bit leaner and be that pass rusher. I think there's some positional interest, like flexibility there.
And that's a great thing for both him and Wisconsin, right? You can allow your body to kind of move forward naturally. He's certainly best at rushing the passer right now. But again, his coordination, balance, and his speed, his ability to run kind of makes you wonder, hey, can you carry this tight end 10 yards down the field in zone coverage? Can you flare out with a running back, a big back, and maybe make a play in space? It starts to make you wonder just how versatile he could be as a senior in high school, and obviously once he gets to Wisconsin for good. And that's a great position to be in because, worst case, hey, go get the quarterback. But best case, you build into something that not only demands a scholarship, but maybe playing time down the line.
Yeah, for sure. All right, coming up, we're going to talk to John about his feel on Paul Chryst and the Badgers recruiting staff, where he thinks maybe they're strong and where they could maybe use a little bit more work. We're going to get into that next on Locked On Badgers. But first, today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline remains your number one source for all your online sports betting needs, information, sports news, reviews, newsletters, podcasts. And it is incredibly informative website where you can go and find out where the latest coach is going and also get the latest futures on every sport. So you can get a feel. It's a great spot to get a feel on where Vegas thinks teams are going, franchises are going, pennant races, where Kevin Durant's going to land. In other words, it's like a little crystal ball into what people think is going to happen in the future. And as a sports fan, that's just a really fun, enjoyable ecosystem to be a part of. If you have a good feel on something, we've talked about Wisconsin over under 8.5 a lot. It actually saw that up to 9 the other day, which is interesting to me. I think 9 would be a push for me if I could. I think 8.5 over is the play. But this is a great spot. Bet online. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device. Learn more about the trends and actions. Bet online, where the game starts. I want to thank everybody again for making Locked On Badgers one of your first listens every day, where we cover your team every single day. And we're going to get John Garcia back on. Definitely want to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions do apply. John, let's get into this. So we've had this is a good spot for me. I don't want to call it a dead period, but I've wanted to talk to you about Paul Chryst and just the Badgers recruiting staff for a while, but we've had commits and prospects and official visits, and those certainly took precedent. But I really just want your feel as someone who's been around this industry for a long time, who interacts with a lot of coaching staffs, talks to a lot of people. What is your feel on Paul Chryst and the Badgers recruiting staff from a very broad level?
I think they do their own thing, and I love that. I think the more recruiting shifts and assimilates towards Flash, NIL, outside the box stuff, I think the staying power is of course always going to be with the blue bloods who win. I mean, that's just a given regardless of strategy. But that next group is going to be those who kind of stay in their lane. Do your thing. What is your thing? I don't care about the conference, which all that's upside down too. What is your own brand? What do I expect when I get this scholarship offer? And I do think Wisconsin, because of Chryst, because of the really continued legacy over my entire lifetime, you kind of know what you're getting with the Badgers. And I think that is such a great thing. It's such a hard thing to create, an identity, right? It's so hard to establish that and maintain it, right? Because when coaching changes happen, what's the natural reaction? Well, let's go get a guy who's totally different. If you're a spread offensive-minded guy, I'm going to go bring in this big physical SEC defensive coordinator, and that's how we're going to play ball. Now, think of Baylor, right? I mean, we used to talk about the most explosive, the fastest team. You're just like, they're not going to win, but I'm going to watch Baylor because of their offense. Now you're like, man, I can't wait to see what that front seven looks like because they're going to run shop in the Big 12. So it's hard to accomplish what they've accomplished. It's really one of the more rare things in college football. So when you've got this identity, I think sticking to that, it just makes things easier because you can continue where you've had success, and then you can make small tweaks because look, if you're not changing, you're not trying, right? You do have to continue to evolve towards the direction of the sport. We talked about it on here, right? I mean, quarterback recruiting's got to change. I mean, it's just plain and simple. It's got to change. You need more juice on the outside. And Wisconsin's not alone in this pursuit, right? We've talked about this with Notre Dame, with Iowa, I think Michigan State, pre-Mel Tucker, some of these same conversations. Michigan right now, even off of a playoff appearance, same conversation. So there's still a need to evolve and assimilate to a degree as that identity gets tweaked just a little bit. And that becomes a supplement to what you do, but your foundation remains the same. And I think that's going to carry Wisconsin with recruiting, certainly on the field and schematically, if they can, hold on to some of these really strong assistant coaches and even coordinators. I do think they've got a chance to kind of weather the storm of change that is college football. So it's a program that, again, it's never going to be the number one class. Let's apologize to your audience, Ryan. It's just not going to happen, right?
Right.
Because of what the number one class constitutes on our end, right? It's a national recruiting footprint, going in and getting the flashiest skill position players that often are boom or bust at the collegiate level. Wisconsin doesn't want to play that game to a degree. So I do think there's a little bit more, conservative approach in that recruiting style. So it's not as sexy and it's not as headline worthy, but we'll look at what you just talked about with the over-unders and what you expect from Wisconsin football. You expect there to be a threat to 10 wins every single time these guys lace them up. Even if you know 3 players on the roster, you just kind of believe Wisconsin's going to be strong in the trenches, good defensively. They're going to be able to run the football. So if you start to add a couple more tools to that bag, all of a sudden you can really expand and become that next program that maybe contends for a conference championship and has a shot at the playoff, which is really the next step for 20 different programs in college football right now, and Wisconsin's in that group.
Yeah, I think your point is really relevant to the fact that Badger fans, myself included, I've talked about this on my show, are spoiled, right? At 7, they haven't had a losing season in forever. They make a bowl game every year. 7 wins is a disaster at Wisconsin. It really is, which is a ridiculously high floor. But there's an element of the fan base that will acknowledge that while also saying, I get it. We are who we are. We have our brand. It's great. Can this staff elevate the recruiting? And I think that's where there's a debate among Badger fans. Does it matter if we win? Well, it does kind of matter when you play Ohio State, you lose by 30, which has been a bit of a Wisconsin's lost to Ohio State 10 years in a row, right? Or 10 games in a row. Now, Wisconsin shouldn't split with Ohio State. I think we can be realistic here, but 10 in a row, is there like a ceiling limiting factor here with Badger recruiting?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I do think the on-field product has a lot to do with it, right? You got to maintain that rock solid level that we've seen Wisconsin be at forever, but then it's got to apex every few years. Usually it's once every 4 years, let's say. You've got to hit lightning in a bottle. The stars have to align. Again, I'll reference Michigan last year because it just happened. That type of, we're good. Oh, I don't know. And then, we're in the playoff. It has to apex at a very high level at some point. And I think it's got to be a Big Ten title and a threat, at least a threat of making the college football playoff. If it expands, obviously that possibility grows a little bit more, but it's got to apex at some point. And I think that is where, one, it's really hard to do because so much of it is circumstantial. So much of it is, let's be honest, luck, what the rest of the conference looks like. And I know the Big Ten's about to look really different here soon, so you need more of that luck. But I think you can position yourself to have the opportunity to hit that apex once every few years. And sometimes the difference between 8 or 9 wins and the playoff is does one extra box get checked? One. Can you hit one more level? For Michigan, that pass rush came to life. It was nuts last year. And it masked a lot of some of the back 7 weaknesses that Georgia inevitably exploited in the playoff. But can one thing change within what you do? And all of a sudden you can see things take off. For Wisconsin in years past, it's been an electric runner. That has been kind of the formula. So can it be that again, or can it become this out of nowhere explosive vertical passing game that all of a sudden people can't slow down? There has to be one other thing brought to the table in order to hit that apex. But again, it has to align with so many other things that it's really, really hard. And that's why I think college football is so great, because you just never know what those elements look like. You don't know how that's going to present each and every fall. So that's why we love this sport so dang much, even though as a Wisconsin fan, I can see both sides of this thing. A spoiled level of, we know we're really good, but can we get to that next level? We want more. And also this kind of frustration of being a team that you could pencil in at 8.5 every single time and be okay with it. You would almost, I'm sure, a group that would rather take a couple non-bowl seasons if it means that 3 years from now, you're going to hit that apex and win 11 games and go to the playoff. So I think there's reason for both sides of the fan base to feel how they feel until something changes.
Yeah, and I think that element of that fan base that would be fine with that wouldn't be fine with that once that season happened, right? Like it's super
Also
right.
that, right?
Like 'cause you're hitting the nail on the head, but there are teams, real teams with real history who haven't been to a bowl game in years. Nebraska, but I mean I'm not taking a shot at Nebraska. Like there's a lot of teams like that, and you know it shouldn't be taken for granted. But there's definitely friction internally, and I want to get into that a little bit more in the next segment. I want to talk about realistic recruiting ceilings, kind of, and maybe compare them to a couple contemporaries in the Big Ten, not Ohio State, but like a Michigan State, and do a little bit there. I want to finish with this though, because Paul Chryst brought in a bunch of new assistant coaches, Bobby Engram from the NFL, for example. Is it fair to expect coaches that haven't been in college for a while, haven't been recruiting for a while, to come in and recruit right away? Like, what type of lead time does Bobby Engram, for example, need to get ramped up, or none?
It's a great question. I do think the NFL cachet carries weight. I mean, I think what we talk about what kids want, and that comes up first. It used to come up second. When I first got in this business, it came up like third or fourth. It was like, hey, I want to go get a great degree and win some games and have fun. Now, no kid tells me that. No
That's
kid's like, man, I can't wait to get this degree. They're like, no, I want to like buy my mom a house. I want to take care of my family and get to the league if I'm good enough. So I want to go to a school that's going to develop me to that point. That's what we get from kids right now. So I do think the people coming down from the NFL do have that ability to sell that instantly. Hey, I know what the play calling looks like. I know what the scouting department looks like. And I think you've got a shot if the stars align for you and you play your cards right to make this point. I do think in that regard, yeah, you can contend pretty much right out of the gate. But on the other side of it, how much has the recruiting game and rules in recruiting changed just in the last 2 years?
Mm-hmm.
It's been flipped upside down. I mean, Saban is complaining, right? I mean, come on. If it's getting pushed back at that high of a level, imagine a guy who hasn't been in the game for that long, and it gets coming into a foreign language class day one, and you're expected to write a sentence and spell it correctly and grammatically succinct, and that's not something that you should expect anybody to be able to do. So I think that is part of the curve with bringing in NFL guys. Sometimes they do hit the ground running. I think in certain positions it's easier to sell that. But I think elsewhere it's harder. It's harder to get that point across if it's not so obvious and in your face. But I do think by now, after this past summer, which was really going to be a crash course for any new assistant coach, you got to start to settle in at this point. You should have time management skills on lock. You know that it's something that you got to do every single day. And if you don't, you're probably not going to be around long, or you'll head back to the NFL, which a lot of coaches have done and a lot still want to do because they're a little fatigued with all the changes in recruiting. So it's not for everyone, but you do find out relatively quickly, and then you can adjust your approach from there. So yeah, I would keep it on the shorter end of the expectation spectrum in terms of time. I think you need to hit the ground running or be very close in that regard. So I do think for all these coaches, even first-year college guys, the clock is somewhat ticking.
No, that's a great answer. It means if we don't get a quarterback in the next week, Bobby Engram is officially on the hot seat. That was really insightful, though. Coming up on Locked On Badgers, one more segment. I really want to pick John's brain on really just where the Badgers should be. What's a realistic expectation for Wisconsin in the recruiting landscape in the Big Ten? That's coming up on Locked On Badgers. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Locked On Badgers. Really appreciate you making the first stop here as we talk about your team every single day. Bring John Garcia back on, Sports Illustrated football recruiting director and Locked On's recruiting football insider. John, I want to kind of finish up with this. In your opinion, like, where should Wisconsin be? Like, what is a realistic expectation? We talked about they identify really well. They know who they are, but you still can't be in the 80s. I know that's hyperbole. They're not recruiting in the 80s, but,
Yeah.
they were in the mid 40s. If you look at kind of the industry standard, there's a lot of places, but they were in the mid 40s last year. They're sitting around 50-ish this year. Now, a couple of years ago, they finished 16th, 17th, depending on where you would look. So what's realistic here? What should Badger fans be able to point to and say that's where we should be?
I think it's the top 25. It kind of reflects the on-field expectation in my mind. Now, again, we talked about, what it takes to finish with the number one class and the risk and chances you have to take in targeting some of those guys. So it's no easy feat to consistently be in the top 25, and certainly NIL and some other factors have changed the landscape of the programs that have the ability to be either top 25 or higher. Like, hey, now we view Texas as a school that's going to finish in the top 5 every year now. We weren't saying that 12 months ago. So I do think that part of it obviously bumps down other schools that aren't in that conversation. So Wisconsin could be a bit of a casualty of circumstance in that regard. But in that top 25 to 40 range is really where you should be. It should never really dip. And I'm talking signing day. I'm not talking August 11th. I'm talking National Signing Day. You need to pull in a top 35, 40 class. I mean, there's really no reason you shouldn't. You know, the Power 5 is 65 programs. Wisconsin belongs on the front end of that discussion, whether you're talking school, football, recruiting, mascot, whatever you want to do, locked on hosts, of course, whatever you want to do in that regard, you need to be in the top half of it because you've been one of the banner programs in the sport for such a very long time. So there's really no excuse to be left out of the top half of that. So if we're going to cut the line at, I guess, 32 and a half and splitting the Power 5 into 2, that's kind of the line for me. Are you over or under that line? I don't think Wisconsin realistically should ever be under that in a normal circumstance. Again, do you weigh the portal with recruiting? Do you weigh walk-ons? So we talked about at the top of the show. Can you weigh that in how you judge a recruiting class? Right now, I don't think anyone in the industry does. But if you start to weigh all those elements together in some amazing, Dr. Strange scientific formula, then you need to be above, our theoretical Mason-Dixon line of 32 and a half, and you need to be on the top half of that spectrum. And I think Wisconsin can get there, and I think they should be there at the end of this cycle and just about every cycle. There's still a lot ahead for the Badgers and basically everyone in the sport right now.
I think that's a great answer because I think, first of all, your point that, the Badgers were aggressive in the transfer portal. They brought in 3 secondary players, a receiver, and certainly weren't the only ones. But, I think that 32 and a half, because when you initially said 25 to 40, Badger fans sometimes talk about how NIL is going to hurt Wisconsin, and we're going to wrap up here. But Wisconsin's more of a have than a have not in the college football landscape. 100%. In the conference they're in, the history they're in, the NFL success they've had, so if you can't be in that top 32-ish, like you said, split the difference, I think there's something wrong if you can't consistently do that.
I agree 100%. I think if there's a fan base, a portion of the fan base that is, I guess, feeling sorry for itself, that one needs to be pushed to the side to a degree because, this is a big time college football program that should continue to recruit as such, not by everyone's standards, but by most standards, 100%.
John, man, thank you again for coming on. We are always smarter because John Garcia joins the show, Sports Illustrated College Football Recruiting Director. Find him on Twitter. We're going to link everything he has. Anything that you're working on right now, John, that you want to share or throw out there?
Well, we just released the SI 99 player ranking, so our best 99 recruits in the country, in our opinion, preseason. That list is out. The first class ranking is out. Top 25, of course, Wisconsin on the outside looking in that regard, but we'll update all of those here in the near future. So certainly check back to SI.com and check us out on Twitter as well at SI All-American.
Awesome, man. Until hopefully next week again, we can try to keep getting John on the show. Really appreciate it, man. Thank you for the insight.
Cheers.
All right, later, John. John Garcia, Sports Illustrated Recruiting Director, Locked On Football Recruiting Insider, always smarter when he's on the show. Really, couple really interesting things he brought up. I think, he's in line with where a lot of the fan base would be in terms of where Wisconsin should be from a recruiting class, which is in the top half, definitely not in the 40s, definitely not in the low 30s. If they finish 30, 28, 27, I think that's the lower end, but that's a realistic end of where they should be. Wisconsin is not a have-not. NIL should not disproportionately impact Wisconsin. The transfer rules, all of this stuff, the portal, like Wisconsin is much more of a predator in this college football landscape than other schools, right? And it does feel at times like Wisconsin maybe takes kind of an aw shucks attitude to it. Well, these other schools are doing this, the other schools are doing that, and this, and their NIL is so strong. Like Wisconsin should be in that mix. So as always, really appreciate everyone listening to Locked On Badgers, where we cover your team every single day. We're going to have a bunch more football content coming up, more basketball content coming up with the France trip. So stay tuned. Really appreciate it. On Wisconsin, and we'll talk again later.